Okay, well, let's start this all over again because I did this whole recording and realized I did not have my microphone on. So here we go. Let's start over. So you hit File, New. Mind you, I am in Blender 2.79, so it's going to be slightly different for the newer models of Blender. So say we just want a basic test cube. Let's go ahead and leave that like it is and save. And we're just going to call this test cube and save. Now we're going to export it. We're going to export it as an FBX file. I have mine set to save to one specific folder. So this contains all of my FBX files. So let's go ahead and export. And now it's ready for me to go and grab in Unity. So in Unity, we go over to that same folder where we saved everything. Mind you, I have this set up here I use the tab folder structure in Windows. So I have your this is actually where I save all my models to, and you can see here's the one we just created. Here's my output. That's for Unity. After it's done, it exports it out to here. And you'll see all these. Those are just remnants of older models. Over here this is actually my modding folder. It lets me kind of be able to intercept and mix and match the configuration files. So I like to have that open as well. And then this is the base game. This lets me come in here and reference any other thing like this that I want to see. This will come in handy in a bit here. So good to have that open. So let's go back to our models folder. We are going to now drag and drop this right into all of our models that we have here. You'll see here, this is actually all the models I've made so far. A lot of these, this is like my particular folder, but a lot of these are the demos. These examples come with the Unity project. So we're actually going to need the battery because I'm going to base this size on this battery. So now what I need to do is go in here and we actually need to add our parts. So I need to open up my JDSA and I need to now I already dragged and dropped it in here. So I need to drag this into our scene. So here we go. Is our prefab. We want to right click on that, go to prefab and unpack. I'm going to then delete my camera and my lamp from this prefab and then go over to part tool setup and click on create part setup. This is one of the automations that Harvester has put in there. It's fantastic. And boom, now it has the basic structure for a part that we're going to need to import. Let's go ahead and click on inspector. And what we need to do is we need to get our part down to a relative size for the game. So what I like a little trick I like to do is I'll take the prefab that is in the examples, I'll drop it under model, and then I'll go to its position and I'll zero it out, brings everything dead center on our scene, and then I'll move it back outside of my test cube here. So that way it's in the scene, but it's not part of my part. So now you'll see over here we have all these different modules. These will all be familiar since you've been doing configuration hacking so far, or if you are getting into configuration hacking, or if you even looked at a config file, you'll see a lot of these look really familiar. Part info, part model, part physics. All these are different modules that are within that configuration file. Not all of them will show, but a lot of them will be in there. So what we need to do now is get our part down. So let's get our size corrected. Let's click on mesh And then you'll see here we'll have several options here: view tool, a move tool, and a rotate tool, and a scale tool. This is what we need. We need this gray box here in the middle. So let's drag this down some. You'll see it start to shrink until we're relative the size of this battery. There you go. Now we can actually remove this battery. We don't need it here anymore. This is just for size. And here we have our properly sized cube. So what we want to do now is we actually want to add a collider. So let's go ahead and create a 3D object here, or you can duplicate it and drag and drop it right underneath cube. F2, rename it to collider, and or COL collider. And now what we want to do is we want to add a component. We want to add it from physics box collider. And now we can come here to the mesh renderer, remove component. So if we're looking only at this, uh, then what you'll see is this no longer has a shape there, but the cube is still there. But our collider exists separately from our actual mesh. And that's kind of fine. That works. So what we want to do now is we want to come here. We literally could just fill out the rest of this information and then export it. But what we'll do, we'll make it a bit more fun. We'll make this a fuel tank. So let's go to parts. What you need to do is add a resource port. That's how resources get in and out of your part. And we'll tell it fuel. We also need to add how is it going to actually connect to things. So we need to add a surface node. We'll just call it surf, and a stack node. I don't always add a stack node, but it does come in handy. So we'll just move this over here. So if things are going to connect to it, it's going to be right there, or we can then come and add a second stack node and just call it stack 2. Back to our inspector. And I'm actually going to rotate it 180 and then drag it the other way. Now it does have these arrows here telling you how it's connecting, and I do believe I botched the rotation. So let me fix that real quick. So let's rotate it on y-axis uh, negative 180 or negative 90. There we go. Okay, and let's go to our other stack node and rotate that one 90. Okay, there we go. And then we'll go to our surface node and we're just going to drag this one. I'm going to drag it down. I want it to connect at the bottom surface. And then I'll rotate that on the X axis 180 because it's pointing the other way. Oh no, it got buggered up. Let's fix that real quick. All right, let's try that again. Okay. All right, so that looks good. And now we actually need to go in here. We have our port fuel. So where do we want it to actually connect fuel? Let's say we want it at the top. Okay, so all that looks good. We have our port, we have our node, we have our stacks, and now we actually need to come back to our main parent and add one last thing, resource container. All right, so let's start from the top, and we'll call this generic fuel cube. And fuel cube. for the short name, JDSA, a cube of fuel. Cost 50, XP cost 1000, it's a cube of fuel. We'll change this to energy. If you want to add more, you can add another one, a hidden plus, utility, for instance. And here's your different methods here, like how do you want it to, the primary attach uh, method, and we kind of, either will work. Um, we also want this one to be usable inside. So if you go to layer and you go down to interior, yes, change children. Now it can be used, it's going to be visible interior to the craft. Can it be vehicle root? We'll leave that unchecked. No surface attach means you can't attach anything to it. We'll leave that unchecked. Your two no move, rotate, and no move and no rotate. We'll leave those unchecked. Okay, so next what we want to do, I'll go ahead and close this down. Go to part model. You'll see mirroring mode. I'm not going to even bother with that right now. Part physics, what do you want it to weigh? We'll say 0.03. It's going to be full of fuel, so it's going to be a really thin fuel tank, but it's going to be made heavier by everything else. If you want to offset your center of mass, you can do it here. Part icon, you see this white box here? That's what it's going to look like when you're in the builder. Right now, it'll look really tiny in the builder, and the closer you get it, the bigger it's going to look when you're in the builder. I like to give it about right there, just so you can see everything when it rotates. Speaking of rotation, which direction do you want it to rotate? We'll just rotate on the y-axis, and then it'll spin around, looking all nice and cute. And then we already filled all this out, but what we need to do is go to here on resupply. We also need to tell it the fuel node, because we just added that port, and the capacity of, oh, let's say 150. And here's the tank name. I'm going to leave it as tank. It can be fuel tank, typically, I believe is the name for fuel. All right, and that's basically it. You have your port fuel, your fuel resource, you have your attached nodes, you have your uh, stack nodes, all the good stuff, all the fun things. If you go under part script, you'll see here you can either save the config, like say you made some changes to a lot of these modules and you just want to save. You can actually then go and just do that, or you can export the whole thing. What you have here, like say for instance, if you wanted to look at this, you'll see here's a good example. So here's everything we just modified in part. That is relative to this configuration file. Not everything is going to show in here, but a lot of it will show in here. It's a really simple part, and you see it's just like that. So we'll go and hit export, and it's going to build our part. Everything's automated now. Give it a few seconds. Okay, so now that's done. Let's go back to our folders. And remember I said that it goes to my output folder. Here's my output folder. Ignore the output, these two here. Um, it still does that. I don't know. Maybe Harvester can answer that one. I'm probably doing something wrong in there, but it's still there. And then here is your test cube. Here's your test cube config. And if you wanted to look at it side by side, you can do something like this. compare, and you'll see here, here is our test cube on this side, and here is the basic fuel tank medium that is from the base game. And there's no XP cost there, so whatever. If you can actually change it here in the config file, or you can change it all the way back in your all the way back in Unity. Either which way, it'll come out the next time. And you see, we actually have utility added in for ours. They have a mirror access here. I ignored it. Here's our mass. Theirs is a bit heavier, things like that. So we are actually ready to bring this in. One thing here, I noticed that I forgot to put in my fuel ID. I can just call it fuel because I already know it's called fuel, and save. So now we're actually ready to bring this into the game. So what we'll do, we'll select our test cubes, cut, and I'll drop this into my folder. Now, I want to come in here, grab the name of my config file. I need to go up one folder and go to my mod configuration because I need to add this part so things don't go haywire. I'm just going to drop in the name. I know it's in this exact folder, so I'll save there, and that's all I need to do for that mod config file. Now minimize all this, minimize this, minimize this, minimize this, and start the game. Now I want to make sure that it's recording properly. Okay, it is. All right, we'll let the game load on up. Okay, so let's start game, sandbox, jump on in. Let's go over to our workshop, cancel. And since we didn't say it could be root, it's not going to show up in our root. So let's drop in a little balsa board here. And now we need to go over to fuel. And here's your batteries, fuel tanks, and let's go to utility. Maybe it's showing there. Oh, there it is. Looks like I didn't catch it with energy. But here's our generic fuel cube. Now, you'll notice a few things. You're not going to be able to do much with it for decals. It's not going to care because that is dependent on UVs and painting. So that's something for another day. But there you go. There's your part in the game. It's not really too bad. You see it's rotating the exact way we intended. And there's the capacity showing. Nothing spectacular, but it works.